Welcome to the Hive installation lesson. In this lesson, you'll learn how to download and install Hive, configure and run Hive, set up and run the Hive Metastore service, load data from the local storage on your computer into HDFS, and run a simple HiveQL query just to make sure our setup is working well. For this exercise, we're going to use Hive 2.3.7. This is the version I tested my setup with, and everything worked well. First of all, let's open up a web browser and go to www.apache.org. Scroll to the bottom of this page and click on Hive. Next, click the Download a Release Now button. Click on the suggested mirror site. Click on Hive 2.3.7. Next, right-click on the binary for version 2.3.7. Again, this is the version I tested my setup with. In the pop-up menu, select Copy Link. Open up a terminal window. Just like I did for Presto, MySQL, Kafka, and Hadoop, I'll create an installation folder for Hive on my desktop. Again, please feel free to save it in a different location. Next, let's use the curl command to download Hive using the link that we copied. Next, uncompress the file with the tar command. Now, once that is complete, let's navigate into the uncompressed Hive folder and inspect it. Our focus is going to be on the conf folder, so let's navigate into it. Let's go ahead and copy the file called hive-default.xml.template, and that file can be found in the conf folder. Let's copy it into a new file called hive-site.xml. We have to make several modifications to this file, and so let's begin. First of all, search for hive.metastore.uris and modify the value field. Enter the following information: thrift://localhost:9083. If you recall, this is the same value that we have in the hive.properties file in Presto. Next, search for javax.jdo.option.connection URL. You don't have to make any change here. All I want you to do is just inspect it. From this, we can see that we're going to use the default Derby database for our Metastore, and that the database name is metastore_db. For development and testing, it is okay to use the embedded Derby database as your Metastore. However, for production, use a relational database like MySQL or another similar relational database. Next, search for hive.metastore.warehouse.dir. It is used to specify the data location in HDFS. You can see that the default value is \user\hive\warehouse. Again, nothing to do here except just inspect it. And now, we're going to make some changes. What essentially we're trying to do here is that we're going to look for system://java.io.tmpdir and replace every occurrence of that with the string \tmp\hive_io. I'm using Vim, and this is how you can do a find and replace. Use the find and replace feature for your editor. For this version of Hive, there were 4 occurrences of our search string, and we replaced all of them. Finally, let's look for system:/user.name and replace it with your username. And we can see that it found 3 occurrences of the search string and replaced all of them. And with that, we've completed the modifications to this file. Copy the path to the Hive directory. We're going to use this information to update the bash_profile file. Let's also add the path to the lib directory for both Hadoop and Hive. And of course, we want to issue the source command so that the changes can take effect for this terminal window. Next, let's kick off Hadoop since Hive is dependent on Hadoop. Hive will only run if Hadoop is running. Let's navigate into the Hadoop folder. A quick JPS command to show that Hadoop isn't running. Next, let's kick off the start-dfs.sh script to kick off the data node, the name node, and the secondary name node. Next, let's kick off the start-yarn.sh script. This should kick off the resource manager and the node manager. Next, let's create some directories to store temporary and Hive data. Let's make sure we're in the conf directory. Let's first create a temp directory for temporary data created by Hive. Next, let's create a user directory. To do this, we're going to have to build out the structure for this directory because the system will not let us do it in one shot. So, enter Hadoop space fs space dash make dir, that's mkdir, space / user. Now repeat that process but with a / user / hive. And repeat the process one more time with a / user / hive / warehouse. If you recall, this is the data location in HDFS. This is the default value that we talked about in the hive-site.xml file. Hive will use this directory to store every table we create unless we specify a different directory. Let's inspect the directory structure. Next, let's change the permission for the /temp directory. Let's also change the permission for the / user /hive /warehouse directory. And finally, let's inspect the directory structure once more to see the changes. At this point, we are ready to use the schema tool to initialize the Derby database we saw earlier. Run the command. Next, let's run Hive Metastore as a service. And finally, let's open up a different window and run Hive just to test that everything is working. But before we continue, a quick note on Hive. Hive is a combination of 3 components: data files, the metadata piece which stores metadata like column names, column types, schema. If you recall, the metadata is stored in the Derby database and accessed through the Hive Metastore service. And finally, the third part is the HiveQL query language. Let's run a simple HiveQL query. Let's first show tables. Next, let's show databases. At this point, we want to create a table that will contain the PPE data for Hospital A. And let's go ahead and specify the columns. But before that, let's take a look at what the file looks like so that we can see the columns. We can see that the columns are similar to the columns for Hospital B and C. During this creation process, let's also specify a few more things. First of all, just a comment on what this file is all about, the PPE data for Hospital A. Next, how the row format delimited fields are terminated. And then the fact that it is a text file. And next, the location of this file, and that location should point to a location within Hive. However, I haven't created this yet, so I'm just going to go back to Hive and create this location. Let's make sure we're in the conf directory. Now, using the Hadoop fs command, go ahead and create a directory called my data. Let's inspect the directory structure before copying the file. Now let's copy the data from our local file system on our computer into the newly created My Data directory. The file is in my Downloads folder, so let's go get it from there. Let's just inspect the directory structure now that we've copied the file. We can see that it's there. Now that we've created the My Data location within Hive, Let's go ahead and indicate that the header of the file is the column name. Since the text file for the PPE data for Hospital A has a header, let's go ahead and tell Hive to skip the header since we just created the different columns here. At this point, we're ready to do a simple query. Let's select the first 20 rows of Hospital A's PPE data. Next, let's select the first 20 rows of the category column. Let's repeat that with the product column. And finally, with the number of units column. And with that, we see that everything is working well. In the next video, we will switch to Presto and query the same data. Since Presto does not require HiveQL or Hive's execution environment, we will focus on querying the data through Presto from this point on. But before that, let's summarize what we've learned so far. In this lesson, you've learned how to download and install Hive, configure and run Hive, set up and run the Hive Metastore service, load data from local storage into HDFS, and run a simple HiveQL query just to make sure that our setup is running well.